Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining XR for Europe, Federico and myself, for an improvisational and kind of casual chat and discussion about important topics of the day. Important topics, we call them deep dive discussions because it's an opportunity for us to explore a topic more than we might be able to do, in a presentation at an event where it's kind of a one-sided presentation of a position or opinion, but also a little bit more free form and reactive than sometimes like a blog post or an online chat would be, like a message chat. So this is why we're interested in holding this type of conversation here today on the discussion of digital identities, specifically with the title of what makes you your avatar or avatars, because you may have more than one. So XR for Europe is a pan-European association who represents those who work with immersive technologies, XR, virtual worlds, all over the continent of Europe. We engage in research. We work with researchers on topics of all sorts, but include ethics and human-centered design and digital identities and legalities of virtual worlds. So that's why this topic came up recently. Several of our members, myself included, were able to attend a conference in Brussels last week. It was a 2-day conference. It had an incredibly impressive title of the conference, which was the Global Multi-Stakeholder High-Level Conference on Governance of Web 4.0 in Virtual Worlds. I have to read it because I get all the words right, but not in the right order if I have to go from memory. That was a 2-day conference, and it touched on a very large number of topics. But the most heated discussion, which was definitely around digital identities. And that's not a surprise. If you attend many conferences talking about virtual worlds and XR, particularly as the European Commission is now well into its strategic initiative on virtual worlds and Web 4.0, leading to the virtual world partnership later this year in September, then you know that this topic is just always revealing of what people bring in terms of experience, but also a perspective these discussions. So this is a chance for Federico and myself, who come from different backgrounds and play different roles, but work together to support those who are developing XR, particularly multi-user XR in Europe, to kind of work through some of the things that we have heard, that things that we say, but sometimes things that we don't necessarily get to expand into a proper conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to let Federico now introduce himself a little bit, to put into context what his experience and what his perspective is that he comes with.
Hello, everyone. Working with Michael as a project community manager XR for Europe. So I started with a Master of Arts at London College of Communication in virtual reality in 2018. And that's where we started to discuss identity, immersion, presence in XR, and also the role of avatars. And I started studying and researching that during my master. Then I focused on sound design, but we explored a lot those concepts through different researches that were done at that time. And it's interesting because before preparing for this interview, I went again into researching the sources that were part of my dissertation and also of my different exams that I've done during my master's degree. And a lot of things has changed since then, because I mean the medium has expanded, and also social platforms have changed quite a lot since 2018 2020, mostly because of COVID. So it's interesting to discuss this now, because a lot of what I thought was identity and the role of avatars and the relationship between avatars and people has changed. Mostly also how the European Commission and the government aspect of it has changed since then. So very happy to discuss this. And yeah, I work for for Europe, the Artist Foundation, IFFR. I used to work for Venice Immersive, so I have explored the medium quite in depth at different stages, from production, distribution, concept. So very happy to address this today. Michael, go for your background, because your
Yeah.
background is huge.
Well, I mean, well, you live long enough, you get a large background, I guess. Um, so I bring some perspectives around psychology to this because my undergraduate was psychology, and I've always been very interested in decision-making systems. So, I became known outside of Istanbul, where I started my XR career during COVID because I knew most of the multi-user VR platforms pretty well, and knew how to use them, knew what they were intended for. Um, and that's how I became known because I was leading through the XR Crowd, which is a kind of an informal network of professionals, validations of how to use these platforms in for things like conferences, for remote working. But of course, this was not new. People were already using these platforms, and I was a design PhD student at that time. Unfortunately, COVID kept me from ever really going back into academia. But at least when that started, I was exploring how people were actually using these platforms, how they were building communities and using it to co-work, particularly. So I bring that type of perspective. I also bring a perspective of someone who um, it has been an immigrant, someone who has to go to new countries and try to make a life there, knowing that your identification is a bit different when you're not a citizen versus when you are a citizen. I worked with refugees and asylum seekers for several years in Palestine and then in Turkey. So again, a whole different category of identification and what identification means when something is like a UN indicated status versus a national status, and then of course regionality. So that's not to say that that's always like the most one-to-one inspiration for the discussion, but it is something that informs a little bit those questions. So just kind of getting into it, I think the first topic we'll start with kind of comes from that. We're talking about perspectives of national identities. Is the digital identity and the national identification systems that we currently have or that we're building to, which are becoming more digital. Right, national identifications are themselves becoming more digital. At the conference last week, there was this premise put forth quite strongly that it should be a requirement for virtual worlds that everyone register and be always identifiable, and be able to validate their identity with their national identification, and that just be a requirement, right? This was someone, and it was not the only person. This was, I would say, a minority in that particular conference at that day, but there were supporters for the belief that anonymity is the problem in virtual worlds, and so we should make use of national identification, and that should be an inescapable element. And before maybe I say kind of what my take on that is, Federico, you weren't in that particular room, but I think you've heard elements of that before. Kind of what is your response to that? What is your take on that?
Uh, I mean, the feeling that I always had is that all these regulamentations, I understand why they're proposed, but at the same time, there's always the discrepancy with actually what's happening in the industry and what's actually happening in virtual worlds. That I think we should start defining, like VR chat, Engage, all these social platforms where you use an XR headset or also without an XR headset, but all these 3D generated words where you can socialize with people. And I think like this regulation, like, is very difficult to make it happen, like, because not a lot of people would like that. Because if we look at studies, a lot of users, they usually not choose avatars that are the same as they are, because what's more important is not like that they should represent themselves 100%, but more how they would like to represent themselves. So it's more a psychological thing than actually something that is transactional. As I look like this, then this is the
Mm.
avatar that I would like to create. Like for instance, is more the sense of self, how they feel that avatar represent them, and like if it's going to be too much linear, and it would take too much the fun for people to join those platforms. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, it's interesting because you actually took it in your response was in a particular direction about the representation as well and connecting
Yeah.
that with identity. And that was actually implied. And so again, in that particular, so it wasn't something that I think you don't have to marry these two topics of like your physical identity with your national identity, right? You could still have a number or something, but what your response reminded me that that was actually a sub element of that discussion was using biometrics
Mm.
to confirm, scanning your face to confirm who you are as a way of making it, easier, making it less cumbersome to remember your number, or less able to be copied, or I don't know how that would be less able to copy, but that was the thinking. Um, and that actually does kind of tie into discussions I know at an event, the Metaverse for Good event that was in Barcelona last year. There were a couple people, again, something of a minority in the room, but there were a couple people who really do believe that your physical appearance is a core component of your identity. And thus, if you are in a virtual world, you must their perspective is you must be represented as you are physically, because otherwise there's something fraudulent, there is something deceptive inherently about it. And coming back to kind of something that I got hooked on in these discussions was it was about trust. This was always a justification that by having your national identity uh, you know, viewable, like accessible, confirmed by others in that virtual world with you, that you would have a greater sense of trust in that person and things that you do with them. And similarly, if they look the way that they do outside of the virtual world, you would have more trust. And this, just to maybe take it back, for me, the trust justification never really seems to really align. It seems like a bird's eye view of how people interact, where in reality, we were talking about it. If I meet somebody and they show me, they say, "Here's my ID," I'll say, "Thank you. This is okay. This is your ID. I'm willing to trust that probably this is who you are."
Yeah.
But it doesn't give me a sense of trust to go do something with you. What would give me trust is the validation of other people that I trust, and the social observations I make of you, or the interactions that we have that progressively build to trust that allows me to interact with you more. And I think so for me, around the national identification argument, as long as it rests on the premise that this creates trust for users in the space, I'm just not as convinced that there's a lot of reason to bring it in, because as you said, it's gonna, it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of integration, which can be done, but I just don't quite see the benefit yet from that perspective for what does it bring to the social interaction.
The only thing that I'm thinking that could work is that the biometrics are associated to your profile, and that's like your account registration, but still the avatar can be anything it's going to be, because uh, we know that people like want to choose different avatars to represent themselves, and they want to change that. As much as we change in real life, we change the haircut, we change our clothes, our persona. There's aesthetical chirurgy, makeup, like that is changing our appearance. And as much as our identity psychologically, like, is not something defined, otherwise we will be machines. But of course the national identity has to be regular, like kept inside of a box, like that's your name, that's your age, that's your gender. But at the same time, like, we also know that this is kind of, not really fixed, as otherwise we are completely ignoring transsexuality, non-binary people, and well, we all know what's happening in the US right now, and a lot of trans people are not allowed in the country, even as tourists, because it's fraudulent, because their gender is not matching with the one in their ID and visa. So I mean, like, trans people do exist, and like, they should have the same right to be and decide to be represented as they would like to on platform and in real life. So, like, it's reductive to think that trust can be gained once, like, your identity is fixed, is there, is written down, because our identity is not fixed, and also our trust and relationship that we have with people is not fixed. And I mean, this is like, you don't need a research to know that.
Well, I mean, I think it's, and you mentioned, one of the elephants in the room always now is the policy in the U.S. and how it's changing, and how it's reintroducing kind of national competition for ideologies. And so coming back to this national, and I think this may be the last point I'll make about the national identification thing, because then we're going to talk more about avatars and specifically
Yeah.
that. But like for the national identification, I think as well, like as you said, you could totally have, a national identification that is connected to your account and have as many avatars as you want. So the national identification premise doesn't need to be tied into your digital appearance per se. It
Yes.
just tends to be in that thinking of people who advocate for it. But the other issue with the national identification system is now you really need to start having international relations addressed and accounted in virtual world platforms, and that's really not done very much today. Certainly not at a high level. And if it would be done right now, it would be led by the commercial platforms who do this anyway, who have to make, just because they're a commercial platform with shareholders, right? They make policy according to the value of the market and according to the cost of violating or risking policies in those large valuable markets. So, and just to say that, for example, to your point, having the ability to have an identity other than a male female binary, if the biggest market says, the regulators of that large market say you cannot allow this anywhere in the world, or if you do this, this is a criminality that we will pursue, then they start saying, well, the rest of the world, then we don't do that, we won't allow this anywhere.
Mhm.
And that's kind of the situation we're in now, where there really isn't a discussion to fight back on that, to create, what would that be? Would this be this is a European virtual world. It's a commercial platform that's global, but this is the European virtual world, and here we permit or encourage people to express themselves these ways. But over there, across the digital divide, it's different. Right now, again, like I said, that's kind of just market derived. Um, but right now, again, as these two big markets, European market and the North American market are going through this friction of really not aligning in ways that haven't been as obvious recently. Again, we start thinking, okay, well then, if we're defining our culture according to certain ideologies, then we need to really start establishing where these ideologies, how they're defended, and how they're bordered in virtual worlds. Which to now, the only border was, or it was the platform itself, just the accounts and the way the software technically is set up, and then the owners of it. So it's we don't have like a border system in virtual worlds as of yet. And I think once we start really getting serious about national identity systems, then we need to have those, because I'm just thinking, actually, sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but one of the topics that always comes up is, what about people who come to a virtual world to connect with people that they're not allowed to connect with geographically where they live?
Yeah.
and then you require a national identification to be present, you put them at risk. So actually,
Yeah.
one of the things that there's an XR for Human project that XR for Europe is in. One of the things that they are developing is a code of conduct for designers and developers to go through ethical questions and make the right decision, the best decision that they can when they're designing and developing and deploying these things. But one of the things that I advocate for very much is that a designer and a developer should create systems and envision systems that create as little risk for the user as possible, particularly in this case. So that means that if you're serving a global market, you start saying, I don't want to collect information that's going to create a risk for people for whom I do not want to create risk for. And in this sense, it's just, example, a national identification system represents that kind of risk in many cases.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, but I mean, as much as in real life, trust is to be gained, and once is broken, that's when you start to actually think about that person or that relationship that you have with that person. Like you can't trust regulate things before the trust is broken, because I mean, like it's like when you report something, you report it after something has happened. You don't report people immediately by creating that friction or in the relationship and in the interaction with that person before even like starting a relationship with that person. So that's why you were saying like what also, because every country has a very different culture and way of interacting and way of perceiving safety and also identity, and how much is important the individual in the sense of the community, or if it's the community that is more important than the individual. So all these regulamentations like are of course in an ideal world very helpful, but in practicality they're very difficult to make them happen, because they would limit so much interactions, which are the main thing about social worlds and virtual worlds, and that's how they thrive, and actually how why they exist, to make those interactions happen, mostly between people that are not from the same country or from the same culture. And that's when there's this discrepancy between two different cultures that the interaction actually becomes interesting.
Mhm.
And also people go to virtual worlds mostly because they can feel free to be whatever they want and be able to socialize with people they wouldn't do in real life. It's actually the reason why those platforms exist, to be able to do things that you wouldn't be able to do in real life, because I wouldn't be able to meet and socialize with people that easily from other countries, from other continents. And the more the platform is created around the needs of the users, that is socializing, be able to be free to represent yourself as much as you want, and also like creating like some like limits around those needs so those people feel safe, but without those limits like interfering too much in the interaction between the two users. That's when there's success, when those limits are not actually limiting the interactions too much, and of course until there's consent. So that's the main thing, I think, like consent. That's the thing that we should more talk about, because we're talking a lot about it, like national identity, something that is like more from the community governmental aspect of it, while it's in between two people that there could be the friction. So that's when, like, that's the main thing that we should talk about, I guess.
Well, we will. I think let's focus now though on avatars, because I think then we'll get into these other topics and the latter part of it. But moving on in our agenda to avatars, we talked about, and I think we both agree that you know in virtual worlds there's not a strong reason to limit a person's digital visual representation
Yep.
to their physical appearance. But what about other types of restrictions or limits that there might, that you think that there might be? Because we have deep fakes. I think I don't know that we see deep fakes really in virtual worlds yet, but it's just a matter of time. That's not very, very difficult to do. Already we have avatars themselves of other people, and we have voice modulation and stuff like that, but we don't necessarily, again, we will eventually have that ability. We just don't have it now to deep fake someone. But what do you think about this particular topic about personifying other people, impersonating?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. Um, that's the thing. So again, I think it's consent. If that person puts a 3D model of themselves publicly available online, so that that person knows that the avatar can be used by other people, that person is completely aware of that. They do that. It's okay. The issue comes when that avatar is created without that person knowing
Mhm.
that, uh, and being used without that, like the main like person who is like the avatar knowing that. That's complicated, because in that case, of course, it should be illegal. But I'm thinking about celebrities. Like, if I wanted to be Taylor Swift, like let's pick someone super famous internationally, like I don't think she would like to be embodied by someone that could do anything with that avatar and with that body. At the same time, that's why I think like it's a very like niche thing though, because usually um, it's difficult that a person would like to embody someone else that is human and recognizable as such. Like, there's a lot of escapism in virtual worlds and platforms, and um, there is this thing that well, you say your thing, because otherwise
Yeah.
I'm going on for four as well.
Well, I mean, I think um, the challenge for me in virtual worlds around the topic of personifying someone else
Mm,
is you have the obvious use case of parody. And right, that's really important to maintain that as an option. Just because you are a famous person does not mean that I should not be able uh, to reference you. I guess the practical question is to what extent. And I think with virtual worlds, and with avatars, there is this idea. Well, that I mean, I could be as much you as you are you in terms of avatar because it's just a 3D asset. It's a model. There's nothing, at a molecular level that makes you uniquely you that I could never be, no matter how much I was to make myself appear to look like you physically. So in virtual worlds, that's that unique distinction. It's not so much that I can do something that I couldn't do outside of a virtual world by trying to convince others that I am you for practical purposes. It's that there's a limit on what you can do to be you uniquely. The unique aspect is missing. So you know, because parity has to be protected, one question is, okay, can we quantify the degree of accuracy of an avatar to a physical real world a non-digital model? And if we can quantify that, then we say that, okay, 90%, that's the threshold beyond which going beyond 90% is theft of that person's theft or violation of their unique visual rights. Of course, to your point before, we were talking about our physical appearances. That changes. Do I look 90% like I did 10 years ago? And if I was to have an accident, would I look 90% like I would, yesterday before my accident? So the quantifying part gets hard, but let's just say that's a way, we broadly look at this, to say that if you appear to be 90% like that person, that's enough for parity. People will identify, and thus, therefore, parity can be preserved, but you do not convince anyone that you are that person. So using um, facial and other type of body tracking, imagery to create an avatar could also be used to assess an avatar does not meet, it doesn't exceed a certain evaluation, a certain amount of accuracy. And that would be an interesting solution for that, because then you would say anything beyond this arbitrary number is too far for the accuracy of a digital avatar, an avatar to a non-digital real world person. So yeah,
Question.
I think yeah.
So you know that like in Europe, in some parts of Europe, they need to put on advertisement when a person is being retouched with
Mm.
Photoshop and stuff. Like, do you think that having an icon next to the username of the person in the virtual world saying the avatar chosen by the person is not the real in that case, like if I choose an avatar that is like 50% as me, like I
Mhm.
scan myself, I'm verified, my account is connected to my national identity, but then I can choose an avatar that doesn't represent myself. When I do that, there's a tick or something, symbol that my avatar does not represent myself, or like it does not until a certain degree, like 50%.
Mhm.
While when I can choose the avatars, when I choose the one that resemble me the most that it can be, also because I mean there is also like the difficulty of like creating an avatar that actually looks like you. We know the concept of uncanny valley, that like if it's very close to you but it doesn't because there's something weird about it, like it creates much more alienation and like distrust in that person, instead of having like a super like drafted 3D model that you can tell it's not
Mhm.
myself. So what do you think? Like, do you think that having a symbol would be enough?
I mean, it's another option. I think it would depend on the platform, like where the symbol was. But to your point, transparency. This is you're leading to the idea of a transparency behind the what the model is meant to represent and
Yeah.
being clear. It's a form of transparent communication with the audience. So that is an option. I mean, even maybe having, if it's a human, for example, having the skin green and say everything else is true, but just the skin is green because
Yeah.
no human that we know of living today in the world has green skin. Therefore, it's clear that this is never meant to be confused for that person. So, that's just on the extreme side of it. But the idea is that anything that just communicates to others that this is not intended to be misunderstood as a real person. But again, that that serves for parody. But maybe the other one is if you are, I'm thinking of costumes and people who enjoy dressing up as their. So this is not real people, but this is intellectual property. Even the idea that your avatar can be these things. We you mentioned VR chat I think earlier as a name drop, and for those who know VR chat, it was a platform that came to fame largely on the free use of other intellectual property in their avatars. That's 100% what made it noteworthy and stand out and really drew its early audience to that. And you can make the argument that still it's one of the main features, but definitely in those early first few years, that's why it was the first breakout virtual world platform, like proper VR one. And it's always had a little bit of a difficult relationship with that because that was not monetized in most cases. Many of those avatars were made as passion projects, as hobbies, as enthusiasts. Some of them then went and did proper commission work, but usually the commission works were not other people's intellectual property. The commission work was something that somebody wanted that they needed an expert to go make it for them, an avatar or something. So um, the lack of commercialization seemed to. I mean, I think that is a difference. But it's for me, it's a bit hard when we talk about avatars that are looking like others. I don't think you shouldn't limit that full stop. But definitely the commercialization aspect is where it becomes, I think, much more uncomfortable when someone is making avatars of either celebrities or famous intellectual property, because then that gets into, the an intellectual property, for example, is it's for the purposes of commercialization. So it's infringing upon that. So I mean, I think this avatars, we don't want to limit what people can have, but ideally, avatars should be able to be made for free. I think commercializing avatars introduces a lot of problems and
Mhm.
comfort into areas where if it wasn't there, this would be a lot more tolerable.
Absolutely. But I mean, as you were saying, talking about VR chat, the reason why it's so popular and it, I mean, it's also super used by, I think it's the most popular virtual world platform, isn't it?
Or Rec Room. I think Rec Room maybe is bigger. It's hard to say.
But Rec Room, you can't change much the avatars.
So
Well,
but this is an important. They have a completely different approach to avatars.
yeah,
And
because you know more Rec Room, so
Yeah,
go on.
I mean, I love this distinction because again, the question is, one of the big questions we want to, kind of touch on is what makes this avatar me?
Yeah.
And so like VR chat, you can upload your own avatar. Others can upload avatars and you can download it from there. And these are full body. So they can have full customization. You can be a tree, you can be anything that you want, really. You can have animations that are somewhat controllable even. It's really quite a sophisticated system. Resonite is another platform that allows exactly the same type of stuff. So they take a full body, like you can completely change the entirety of what it is that you are. You don't have to be human. You don't have to be humanoid. I mean, you kind of have to be humanoid on some, I think, rigging level to some extent. But practically speaking, you don't have to visually look like a human. But Rec Room takes a little bit more like Altspace. And well, of course, Rec Room was much more advanced than Altspace ever was, really. Um, especially with their avatars, they take a base. You are a human, and everyone starts off with the same base, and then you customize on top of that. And what Rec Room has done is they've gone with an accessories approach. You build your persona around your accessories. What are you wearing? Hats and gloves and outfits and jewelry, certain customizations of the face, but usually around accessories of what you're wearing. So it takes a really materialistic approach to identity, and so now it's about mix and matching. And now you have to pay for things in there now. They have I mean, by now, I mean for the last several years, it's a much more commercialized space. Like it's the most American of platforms because it absurdly consumerist. Um,
I mean, Horizon works as well.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't been in Horizon Worlds yet. That's one of the things that I
You
think shocked
haven't?
me. I heard so many bad things about it for so long when it was in its prolonged beta. And to be honest, it was always clear that Horizon Worlds was supposed to be the adult knockoff of Rec Room. So why not just stick
Mm.
with Rec Room? You know. But anyway, that's just to say. So they take an accessories approach. So everyone starts off the same, and then you customize on top and express your individuality through combinations of things. And that's a fundamentally different way of constructing and managing and evolving your personality than going into like a VR chat or a Resonite. And this whole avatar is mine. It's constructed whole all together as one. And I think that's, like I said, that's very different because you can't customize that so easily. You have to go back and redesign your avatar. Whereas in Rec Room, you could change it going into your dorm room, is what they call your private space, and going into your closet and just changing the accessories. So it also is this fundamental question: is your avatar you essentially, or is your avatar you today, you at this moment? And I guess it's the permanence of it. So maybe I let you just kind of respond a little bit to that. For me, that's the difference between like the VR chat and a Resonite versus something like a Rec Room and how they approach avatars. And I think these are still like you can look at every multi-user like virtual world platform, and they're going to come down one way or the other. Uh, on how they approach like avatars as an expression of self.
I mean, maybe I should mention that before my MA in virtual reality, my BA was in arts. And while you were saying about Rec Room, which I tried Horizon Worlds by Meta, and it's quite similar in the sense that you have a human character. You can change the appearance by changing the skin color, clothes, but it will be a human. Well, the good thing and super cool thing about VR chat is that you can be anything. You can be a box, you can be a tree, a rock, a cat. You can literally be anything. And I mean, and there was something that came to my mind because that's why I mentioned that I studied arts. There was an artist that challenged that in real life, so not in social words, about what it means to look like a human. Her name was Orlan. Orlan, she used plastic surgery so much that she added like some horns here, and she changed drastically her face, the color. Like she experimented a lot with that. And it was in real life. So the thing that like came to my mind is like how limited Horizon Worlds and Rec Room are in the customization and in the concept of identity of a human. Because even in real life, we can do so much nowadays with plastic surgery, makeup. Like if you look online, like there's a lot of people wearing super crazy makeup and looks, and why we have to be so traditional instead in a virtual world where the idea is that you can be anything you cannot be in real life, and instead push it and push everyone to be people. um, One of the reasons why VR chat is so popular, and I appreciate it more than other platforms. And talking about avatars, maybe for other things I prefer Rec Room. For instance, the games are much better. But we're talking about avatars. So the VRChat is also the most common social VR for trans people because there are so much options that you can be whoever you want, and people can explore and express their gender identity in ways that may not be possible or comfortable doing that in everyday lives, because some people may be living in a country where they cannot express their identity or gender identity or comfortable even trying that. And VR chats, there are studies that have supported a lot of people instead in challenging and redefining their own understanding of gender, giving them a greater understanding in also in the real world. And there's a study called Proteus Effect, done by Nick Yee and Jeremy Bellinson at Stanford University in 2007, so way before like XR was popular and everything, that people change their identity while having avatars. And they change their behaviors because of their avatar's appearance, because they can predict how people will react to their avatar, and so their associated specific behavior would change in the avatar they're wearing. Um, so it's interesting because there's this relationship with avatar and real person is not just about emotions, it's not just about, as we said before, like I look like this, so I have to be like that. I think that is, if like a lot of people would like that as a solution, is because they are cisgender and they have never understood the need of being able to be yourself outside of the real world in a form that is not allowed in your real world.
I think maybe this is a good segue into this next this last topic area, which is around stigma and the concept of, or the assumption of escapism as the driver for why people who use virtual worlds. And I think what, at least what I definitely felt again at the, at the conference last week in Brussels, but I've felt it in many other cases where there's a certain negative view of people who use virtual worlds, or because I mean, honestly, most people who make their career in XR or in virtual worlds, I think it's fair to say a majority do not use them. They have
they've invested time, they've built their career around them. Sometimes they see an opportunity, a professional opportunity, and they may be interested in a far future. The metaverse being that famous shared I don't know, hype of this future, like justifying that we're going to focus more on the future rather than what is today in virtual worlds. Um, I often, when these people, they just don't seem to identify. They don't feel that they identify with people who do actually use virtual worlds now. So they assume that people who use it are escaping something. They're living a fantasy, and there's definitely like a pejorative. Like, so this is, I mean, escapism is a pejorative term, I think, in this case. So I mean, I'd like to introduce this last topic before, and then we'll take questions from the audience, because anyone who's listening to us just to talk about this stuff out loud, you feel free to post any questions that you have or any comments, and we'll try to get to them. But Federico, what do you think about escapism as a motivator to be in virtual worlds? Do you think it's the prevailing motivation, or it's common motivation, or not? How do you think that how do you think it motivates people?
I mean, why would you go to another world if it wasn't for that?
Hmm.
Like, why would you wear an headset visor and like on purpose decide to travel to another world? That by that, of course, means that he has different rules, because it's a different world, it's something else, because it's not real, it's not physical, it's not something that you can touch apart from your controllers, or if you have haptic sensors. Of course, like, you want to, because you're going somewhere else. Even when you go on holiday, you're someone else. You're not behaving as you are in your real world. Like, that is your routine, your daily life. Like, we, even if you move, because I been like moving for several years, and I lived in several countries in Europe, and I was someone else when I was living in London. I was someone else when I was living in Rotterdam. I was someone else even when I was living in Venice, which is not my hometown. It's like a town next to the one that I'm living at. So our identity changes a lot, and even like allowing yourself to explore your identity, to be someone else in another place, that can be another city, another digital virtual world, that is escapism. And giving yourself the freedom to do that, first of all, like, it's amazing. You can, like, even going to a club, like, you dress up a little bit and you go to the cinema, you go to a party. Like, I think, like, it's not just escapism, it's also like allowing yourself to explore your identity, which is something that some people are scared to do, but it's so useful and important for the human person to explore that, because that's how you also can define your identity. Because then, as soon as you question it, because you're trying different versions of your identity, that's when you are able to define it. Otherwise, you just assume that's your identity. And I mean, again, so one thing that I want to add about the thing you were saying just before, I agree that some people have never tried virtual worlds, or haven't been there much, they haven't populated and actually experienced much virtual world. But that's why I'm always like, there's a discrepancies in some people that are working in the XR industry but are not really part of the XR consumers. And I mean, we should ask the consumers, why are you going to XR?
Mhm.
How do you feel there? What do you want? When do you feel safe? When you don't feel safe? So proposing regulation when you don't actually use XR, like, how can you do that? Because you don't even know what you are, like, regulamentating, you know?
I mean, I think that's the concern that I have when I attend these conferences, is that there's very rarely a voice heard from a user, or
Yeah.
representing the user base of these existing platforms. It usually is um, people who want to regulate what they see is undesirable behavior that takes place in that. And they know that it takes place because they've read somewhere that it takes place. It's not necessarily from even their own lived experience, which is not to say that there aren't people who do have that lived experience of a negative, of an undesirable or aggressive or even criminal type of activity. But that isn't the prevailing perspective in those types of conferences. But for me about escapism, it's interesting when you were saying like, why would you wear this headset? Why would you, go into that world? It's often like, why would I take a 12-hour flight to go to another part of the world?
Here
You
we
know,
go.
it's an unpleasant, and not to say that, some of the flights are fine, but the airport experience is not great. I go through it because there's something that I want there. Now, that could be escapism. I could use that term. I mean, and I think you described some things that I wouldn't call escapism, but you may call it escapism. But there's a lot of variety within that meaning. It's not so much that I'm in a bad position in a bad place. I'm unhappy, and this it's as you said, I want to go there. There's something that I want there. Doesn't mean that I want to live there, and that's what I want all the time. But it's something that I want now. I want to go meet these people. I want to go have these experiences. And for me to do that, I need to go into a virtual world. Um, but I think the perception of escapism seems to come from this belief that if you have to escape, you've done something wrong. And when I'm talking about like in these conferences, when I was saying before, sometimes you get a little bit of a window, you get a little peek into the ideologies of the speaker. And again, informed by their lived experiences, not to undermine their ideology, but it's just say that, okay, we probably differ on something core about how we see societal rules and obligations or the role of authorities. Like we probably differ here because starting to see the expression in how we envision the ideal virtual world. Right, you are not allowed to be there if you're not in good standing with your national authority, that your ID does not allow you permission to be there. And that you are always searchable on the basis of your authority, of the authorities' recognition. But again, you aren't allowed to go there if you're not allowed to go there, because to go anywhere, you should have permission and approval. And yeah, and that's the kind of a situation where you would call that escape. I'm trying to get there because for some reason, I'm not allowed to go there. That's like an escape. It's like I'm in prison. I wanted to get outside because I'm not allowed to go outside. That is the escape. So, I think it was something that I read about Tolkien. They were asking about fantasy, and this was, early 20th century when there was a pushback on fantasy as a genre.
Yeah.
Because it was escapist. And and I don't know how true this particular quote was, and I'm not quoting him verbatim, but it was something to the effect that people who have issues with escapism, a fantasy, the person who doesn't like the concept of escape is someone who thinks like a prison guard, because that is what they are designed to do, is to prevent escape. They're not comfortable. It's not that's not how they see the world and their role in it. And so he's like, usually an authoritarian is the one who sees escapism as something inherently wrong because it undermines their authority. So I don't believe, broadly speaking, that everyone, and maybe not even most people, use virtual worlds for what I would call escapism, as much as they simply want to be in a place with others doing something that they enjoy. And this is just where they need to go to do that thing. But for those who do use it to escape a situation in order to have a relief from a situation that they're in, there just fundamentally shouldn't be anything wrong with that. But it is seen like that. It is very often just quite coded in that way when people speak about it in public.
But it's very cultural because,
Mhm.
I mean, I am illegal in many countries because I'm a gay man. But in
Mhm.
Europe, I'm not illegal. I'm allowed to be myself. But see, like when homosexuality was illegal, you like were supposed to get married with a woman, even if that wasn't the case and you didn't want that. You couldn't dress up, you couldn't be yourself. You had to do that in specific places that were recognized as a safe space for homosexual people, LGBTQ plus people, queer people. And I mean, this is very contemporary also now. Like, when do you define that something is criminal and is not absolutely, like, something maybe universal, like killing, rape, and like sexual abuse? But like homosexuality, is it illegal? In Europe, it's not, but in many, many countries in the world, it is. So some people may find relief going to virtual worlds and being able to be themselves and expressing their sexualities, their gender identity as they want. Um, and in those cases, even like being able to talk to people, like I think about North Korea, they are not able to join social platforms, but if they could, oh, they would love to chat to other people outside of their country and like be able to express like feelings, thoughts about what they want. So, I mean, again, we are a very privileged continent, Europe, and sometimes we forget that we have a lot of privilege here and that we have a lot of rights. And that's when we should be very, very cautious when we are regulating something, that we're not destroying and the rights to be able to be ourselves and to express ourselves.
Mhm.
I
No, I
think
think
again, yeah, sorry, no, no, go.
no, I think it's a good way to kind of bring it back to the first initial topic around national identity and is
Yeah,
talking. And you start importing what are the rights in different nations now, importing those definitions and limitations into virtual worlds. And I would say is for the moment, I think virtual worlds as a space should be as welcoming as possible until it's going to come. I think limitations and barriers they get built because
yeah,
it's probably human nature to build them anyway. It's just unavoidable. They will be built, but I don't think anyone needs to be in a rush to build barriers. And using identification, digital identity, and avatars as using them as barriers to identify to personal representation or identity or exploration or behavior and participation, community forming. I don't I there are we'll have these barriers coming anyway, but if we can avoid using digital identity and avatars artificially as such a barrier, then I think we will have bought ourselves some time to build more value for more people in virtual worlds. So that's, I would say, broadly where I come down on it. We should be really trying to keep this as open as possible for as long as we can, because it won't be open for many more years, I would say.
I mean, if I may add on this, and I hope that policymakers would listen this. I mean, you can't define a person criminal until that criminal acts as a criminal. So starting by putting limitations on people because everyone potentially is a criminal. I mean, criminal is defined as such when they act and they do something that it's illegal. So, like, I think we should start limiting the actions of people when they do something that is illegal, starting immediately by defining that everyone potentially is a criminal, so therefore we need to limit beforehand, doesn't allow people then to express themselves freely and feel safe because they feel like already they're judged as potential criminals and potential people that could do something illegal. Well, I mean, that happens once they do something that is illegal, and we should allow people to be themselves until they behave in a manner that is not socially acceptable or that doesn't allow inclusion and for other people to feel safe in that space. But doing it beforehand, that's a big problem, and that's how a lot of big issues in the world we have right now. It's one of the main reasons.
I mean, I guess maybe as a counter to that point, I think,
Go for it, yeah.
yeah, there are people who are already uncomfortable with some behavior. They know that now. They could tell you it's already socially unacceptable to us now. We don't need to see anything to know that. And I
Yeah.
think the question, this is the challenge, is how to respect that. I mean, they have the right to not be comfortable with something, but to allow the space for them and others to exist in virtual worlds without having to exacerbate that. I think it's the things around, like, socially unacceptable behavior. Oof, that's tough, because
Mhm.
what isn't socially
There
unacceptable
you
to some
go.
segment of society? So it's really about about not limiting that, but certainly providing people the opportunity to not to have an escape, but if we're going to use it, but to have a way to simply be comfortable in virtual space, even that means to be in a different virtual world than people in the other virtual worlds that they don't want to share that virtual world with. So, this certainly, you're not going to make everybody happy, and I think that's going back to, like, we should always be, and by we I mean the collectively. I think virtual worlds, with regard to tolerance and acceptance, is doing its job if everyone's a little uncomfortable, because that's if some group of people is too comfortable, that means probably there are restrictions against others
Mhm.
that maybe are going a little further. I think if everyone, it's like a compromise concept. If everyone's a little unhappy about it, it's probably a sign that we're kind of in the sweet spot where we need to be. Because, so I mean, that for
Also,
me anyway
because
is my guiding light. Yeah, yeah.
restrictions will always be against minorities. That's how the world is working and has been working, and it's always like that. And luckily, we live in a age where at least minorities in most of the world are acknowledged, and uh, more and more we're gaining rights and respect and acceptance. But it used to be like that. It didn't used to be like that. So when we put restrictions, we always have to. In Europe, again, we're lucky because it's opening up more and more to minorities. But I mean, it's always kind of difficult because when you define regulamentations, you need to put minorities, take them into consideration at least, and it's very difficult, I mean, we have a question by Regina. Hi, Regina, by the way. And I want to ask to you, Michael, should there be
Uh-huh.
limits to what avatars can represent? Because this is very
Yeah,
coherent to
yeah.
what we have been discussing
Well,
now.
yeah, it's a very good question, because the answer is never going to be very satisfying.
Yeah.
Um, which makes it a good question. So, but it does highlight to what I said. Should there be limits to what avatars can represent? Yes. I can't think of it right now, but
Yeah.
yes. And so, as I said, totally should be avatars that I'm uncomfortable with, or you're uncomfortable with, or anyone is not. There should be avatars that everyone's uncomfortable with, because again, discomfort is it's just one of those things. You have to be capable of tolerating some amount of discomfort. Pain is something else. But again, pain is very subjective, and so one person's discomfort might be another person's pain, very authentically, and that's actually probably lots of examples we can think of in social context. So that also is, so the answer is yes, Regina. I think that there should be limits to what avatars can represent, but I cannot tell you right now what that limit would be. But I do believe that out there, I may dream of it or see it or be exposed to it and say that probably shouldn't be.
Mm-mm.
And I would have to be capable of explaining it in that moment. but I cannot now blanket say no, this can't be, because again, you have this area of parody and challenge, right? And offense. Offense is something that it has. There's a right to offend. Just, I mean, that is something that's there, but you kind of know when it goes too far for you, and you probably know when it goes too far for others, and that yeah. But then again, the question is, do you limit, or do you provide people an opportunity to say, this is not where I don't want this to be around me, or I don't want to be around it. So
To build up on that, because she has a lot of questions here, but I want to ask you something because it's related. Because she asked, what responsibility do XR developers and marketers have in preventing bias and exclusion when creating environments and avatars where people can adapt avatars and interact? So, like, do they have a responsibility on that? Is it like the platform which is hosting
yeah.
the virtual world? Is it the developers? Is it the marketers? Where do you think the responsibility should be put in all this?
I mean, yeah, but the easiest answer is that the responsibility is distributed. I mean, it's just, it's based on the contribution to decision making. So if there's distributed or aggregate decision making, then responsibility is split. I would love it, to be honest, if the responsibility was that for designers and developers, because designers and developers are makers by definitions. They are creators, and so that would make sense that they have that responsibility and that they be empowered more than others. But of course, the reality is usually designers and developers are employed to do certain things, with to operate within a structure that limits some of those decisions that they can make. So so just go back to the responsibilities for those who are making decisions. So for marketers, it's more interesting because marketers are later down that process. They're using what has been made, what has been created as terms of tools and resources. But at the same time, they're often the ones who are really guiding the objective, the purpose for whatever is being made for the consumers or for the target audience. So the marketers, it's an interesting one, because they do exercise a lot of influence for the purpose why something is being done, why something is being designed or developed. And so again, their responsibility is determined by the degree to which, or should be determined, the degree to which they are making the decision why any of that is being made in the first place, why the avatars are being created and for what purpose. So.
Well, I want to answer myself one question, and then we received another one in the comments by Victoria. So I will reply to Regina, because there was a question that I think is really interesting. Does my avatar consent to the same things as my in real life me? I mean, that goes back again to the Proteus effect, that a person changes their behavior based on their avatar. So when an individual believes that I will expect certain behaviors from them because of their avatar's appearance, they will engage in those expected behaviors, and they will change their behavior because of the avatar. So again, constant changes a lot because of the avatar we are wearing, embodying.
But I think, but just to because it's about it's not so, because there's a belief that, like, you can just become something else by putting on that avatar, and I don't believe that's supported by research. Because the nuance is actually more like, you have to be able to attribute the experience that you're having to your representation, to your avatar. You have to explain that people are treating me a certain way, or I'm able to do things or access things because of my avatar. So avatars, for example, like going back to the art chat, that have some type of, you know, uh, new element, an animated element. Some, like you see some of the ones that have like animated trees and stuff, like, um, when there's something about your avatar that gives you like a new affordance, then that's very easy. But to start to incorporate that and change your behavior accordingly, because it's a new tool that you have as part of your avatar. But when your avatar it's still just very humanoid, it just looks different than you, then it's still, I think, for your behavior to change, it's because you're attributing something in that environment the experience that you have in that environment with others, you're saying it's because my avatar is contributing to that. People are treating me, there's something about their behavior is based off my avatar. So it's a social construct, or it's specific again to the designed experience. And so that's a nuanced element of that, which I think it's not so much that you become something else. It's that you you have an experience, and now you're aware that because I look different than I might have before, this is a way that I can understand and explain why my experience is the way that it is. And so it's part of a social construction.
If I may add on that, I was looking on Steam, the gaming platform, for some comments by users on this, because it's interesting to have researchers but also have users say what they think. And Aruspex was saying that that's the username. 1 in 3 men prefers to play as a female character when given the option, because female avatars are treated better than male avatars, and because society is harsher on men who transgress gender norms. Men are more likely to explore gender identity in safer digital environments when they are anonymous. And there's that is a research that I found on QuantiFoundry. They studied a lot of MMOs, multiplayer online mass gaming play, in the last 20 years. And it has been consistent that the 60% of female avatars are played by male player. And I could go on, but I mean, the thing is that some users may feel safer using certain kind of avatars with that gender or that kind of physical appearance, because they know it will change their relationship with other users online. So yes,
Mhm.
it is actually uh, a double sword, because it starts from how you expect other people to treat you because you choose that avatar. At the same time, when you start playing, you realize that some avatars are treated differently because they have that physical appearance, that kind of style, so it's treated differently. So it starts from you, but it also evolves as you play and you are part in those virtual worlds as a reaction of how those people and users
Mhm.
reacted to your avatar and your different avatars.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think that just our identity is something that we build with others.
Yeah.
So that it is not something that your national identity card represents something, and we call it identity, but that is not really identity in many ways. It's not functionally an identity. It's again, we build it with others, and when we meet new people or we go into a new environment, we have to build again, either build a new element of it or build it from nothing. Starting from zero. But it is a collaboration with others. That's what identity is. Federico, we have I think some questions here in the chat.
It's one unique question is divided in several comments. I'll read it, and then we decide who's going to answer. So it's by Victoria Stasiuk. While the discussion so far is focused on the elements of escapism with avatars, I'm interested if there is an opportunity to treat avatars as brain food rather than escapism and isolationism. Are there any opportunities for developers to create a UX that enhances the brain food elements for our collective consciousness and overall good for civil society on a global level? I'm thinking about the possible positive elements of people that create podcasts that could have a positive impact on humans. You want to go, Michael, for it?
Yeah, yeah. The last part, and Victoria, if you I encourage you to maybe add some clarity. The last part about the creating podcasts, that one I didn't quite follow, but the earlier one I think I understood. And we certainly didn't want to spend most of our time talking about avatars as escapism. And I hope that we didn't make that connection explicit, because what we were trying to identify as escapism is a value, and is a motivation, but it's not the only one. And actually exploration and experimentation, which I think is what I understand when you say brain food here, is a strong benefit, is a strong value created by having options of choosing avatars and exploring what avatars bring to your experience. So again, going back to it's a contribution to your interaction and engagement with others. So in that sense, it should be very nourishing to your brain, because it's something that you have agency over, right? You have agency over your avatar, and how, for the most part, it may be limited agency, but you have some agency over your avatar, the choices you make with it, and the impact they have on your social relationships in virtual worlds. So I mean, I disagree that it it's one of the inherent values of avatars, is that they provide you something to explore yourself and explore others with.
If I may add on that, I mean, I think we discussed before that escapism is quite a vague definition, because we were saying if you're taking a flight to 10 hours flights because you want to go on holiday, is that escapism? I think escapism can be, but is not the main thing. Because one other comment that I have here, that was from PT Volts on Steam, was sometimes I choose an avatar not just for what they are, but what they wish they were, or something they believe represent who they are inside. Sorry, the subject is they. So, such as using an avatar character to make the person feel more outgoing and talkative rather than looking small or shy. And by using an avatar of a gender you feel represents you better. So, choosing an avatar that is super tall, super masculine, because that's what you want to be perceived as. Like that, of course, changes the dynamics between you and that avatar, and also the brain connection that you have. And therefore, like, of course, it will make you feel better. It's not just there is an escapism, it's also exploring your identity and how that makes you feel when you choose another avatar that enhances also your personal social skills. And sometimes maybe you come across an avatar that you really like, and also you be clicking on that and like, what is this character? You may research online what is the character, and you may find something more about that character that you like, and that would maybe like choose that because the value that character has resembles yours, or like maybe that values are something that you really believe in, and you would like to try to go towards those values. So I think there's a lot of brain food when choosing an avatar that has a positive value to it, because it creates like a kind of path between you and those values, you and those kind of social skills that you may not have, or you have but are not as developed as that avatar that resembles and represents those values. Right? What do you think?
I mean, that's a long and complex answer with a lot of
Yeah.
elements. So, I mean, I would say, yeah, I generally agree with it, but that was there's a lot. I mean, again, it's a
There's a
choice that
lot.
you make, your agency. That it's the choice of an avatar fundamentally is a choice that you make, that you can consider. You can go back and change it, because you're not stuck with it. It's not a
Yeah.
permanent
Yeah.
thing. So I think just fundamentally, um, it should be an opportunity for a positive contribution to the virtual world social context that you operate in, that you
Yeah.
live in. We have a few more questions that I would like maybe just to kind of wrap up with, because then we have then we just really use our time fully while we're here. So this is no this
It
this
wasn't already
interesting
super
question.
long.
No, I know we went a lot longer than, but that's what happens, and we're here. So let's explore a
Yeah,
couple things.
go for it. Go for it.
Um, if a person is scammed by an avatar that looks friendly or responsible, that's just a very good look, it's a very believable and trustworthy looking avatar. Um, who's responsible for the scamming? I mean, who shares responsibility? That's rather than say it's binary, it's all or nothing, one person. Is it the avatar, the designer, or the user? Because if, and I guess this is like trying to say that we know what a believable avatar is, and then that's not unreasonable, right? Because we know how to make a believable
Yeah.
advertising persona, right? We know how to construct certain visual cues for trustworthiness. But then someone uses that avatar and goes and scams somebody off of that.
Yeah.
Um, do you think the avatar designer has some responsibility? Because this goes back to we don't have it right now, right? Because if you were to go wear clothing or have cosmetics or some type of plastic surgery to make you look more believable, that usually doesn't really have, I wouldn't say, a tremendous amount of impact. It's still your behavior that would kind of make you more believable or not. So in a non-digital realm, there isn't a lot of contribution that others could make to your to making you more believable. But in a virtual world where people are represented by digital models that are created by others, textures that are created by others, in audio things that are created by others, then perhaps there is some responsibility there, because even to be present, it's something that others facilitate your presence.
I mean, I don't agree because if the developer I think it's in the intention here that like should be the main focus. If a developer creates an avatar of a dog or a very good-looking,
Mhm.
serene, calm man, like not just animals, but also something that is quite, that you would trust a person with that character. The developer's intention is to create something beautiful, something trustworthy, but that shouldn't open up a way to criminality. Like it's the criminal, illegal person that chose that character that should be
Mhm.
responsible or doing something criminal. The developer just created that avatar because they wanted to create that avatar, and I don't. That's the thing. I don't think that. Um, it all comes from intention. A developer just wanted to create that avatar. Like if the developer wanted to create that avatar to scam people, that's okay, different. But how do you prove that? You know?
I mean, but would you say that that makes a difference? So, in the sense, if the avatar, let's say someone said, "I'm creating a dog," the
Hmm.
cutest, most trustworthy. No, and no one's ever going to doubt a thing you say if you wear this dog avatar, and that's how they
Yeah.
market. So, scammers come and use my. Would it change that the responsibility?
In that case, yes, because there will be a proof of communication that that avatar was created to scam people. But there should be a proof of communication that makes the intention of the developer explicit that that avatar was created to scam. But if that proof doesn't exist, that
But I mean,
developer cannot legally be a criminal, you know?
I guess the question would be is perhaps the designer is scamming the wannabe scammers, because
Oh,
if I
no.
sell
The
if I sell
scammer of the
you
scammer of the scammer.
like if I sell you, some invisible makeup that will make you the most beautiful and most believable person. No one can see it, but trust me, it
Yeah.
works. Then, at that point, uh, I guess it hasn't changed anything from the in this scenario. As you said, the scammer goes out and uses this avatar to go try to scam someone. Even if the person tried to say that they could facilitate through an avatar design, a an avatar that can convince people to believe, can trick people,
Yeah.
um, like I said, I don't know that. I think if anything, they're just scamming the scammers, because
Yeah.
I do believe it's not really about your appearance. If someone can be convinced by your appearance solely, um, then, not to say that can't be some type of fraudulent or criminal act, but you do start saying, at what point, what is the responsibility for the target audience, for the mark, to be exercising critical thinking? right? If an avatar is so trustworthy in appearance that no matter what was said, I'm encouraged to believe them. Um, again, there's a lines of fraud and criminality, but at the same time, you start bleeding into there has to be more going on, not just the avatar's appearance. So I think this question is kind of highlighting what are the limitations of avatar design. They cannot probably by themselves facilitate fraud. They might help a little bit. They might be a small, but probably somewhat negligible. And it's
Mhm.
really, avatars cannot create fraud behavior and content and then the actual lack of delivery on that at the end is what made it fraud. It wasn't the
Yeah.
avatar. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's the intention, it's not the avatar itself. Because what if the scammer sells the cute puppy dog avatar to someone that is not going to use that avatar as a scam?
Hmm.
It's the intention behind the user, is not the avatar itself, the issue.
Yeah. Maybe one last question, and we'll try to keep it quick, and then we'll wrap up on
Yeah,
time. Um,
like it's
let's
just short words for us,
we
so
have
that
a
we
handful
keep
of
it
questions. I'm trying
quick.
to give a short one. Okay. But this might be an interesting one. This is an educational context.
Okay.
So it's about, you're learning in virtual worlds, you have students and you have avatars.
Yeah.
So should virtual classrooms, should they require students to appear as their real selves, or if, and otherwise somewhat limit their avatar options so that they
Are we
can't be
talking about
assholes, they can't
minors?
hmm?
Are we talking about minors?
People who work in mines. Well, I mean, I guess we could talk
You
about
know,
them.
minors like underage.
Yeah, let's say young people instead.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, let's say, I mean, yeah, let's say middle school and high school. Avoid elementary school because right now we're still in this era where the headsets are not intended for those of that age. So let's
Yeah.
keep it middle high school.
High school. Mm, well, you have an answer first than me?
Well, I mean, for me, this highlights the purpose and the role of authority. So coming back to we're talking, before we're talking about national identity and what is authority bringing to this? Why do you want to have national ID and regulated
Mhm.
self-expression? Because what is it offering? And I think one of the things that it's offering, right, is a structured experience. And oftentimes, some people aren't looking for that much structure. In an educational context, particularly an institutional education, this is by definition a structured experience as we understand it. It's not to say that this is what we want going forward, but what we know of a school till now is a rather rigid structure. Um, and for me, this is a question of the same thing about letting children wear what they want or having uniforms or somewhere in between, like restrictions on what people can wear because
Mhm.
of the distraction, because of it brings in elements of society from outside the classroom environment, bringing it into the classroom environment. And is the classroom environment, quite frankly, is it robust enough to tolerate and to process what is coming from outside of the classroom? And I think there are a lot of cases where we would say, well, a classroom probably is not really well prepared to process what's going on outside of the classroom. It's so focused on uh, iterating through its curriculum and trying to achieve its objective. It's very subject to disruption. But that's because it's a very often linear design. It's very authoritative. The teacher is like a very imperial type of figure in that context. So yeah, I mean, it's more of a question about if education itself has to be authoritarian. If it does, yes, there should be restrictions on avatars because that's what the authority requires to maintain authority and control. But if it's not an authoritarian learning environment, then I would say no, it shouldn't. It should not have these types of restrictions.
So I've been to schools where I had to wear a uniform and where I could dress as like whatever I wanted. I mean, there's the social etiquette, but I mean that it's like, of course, like I couldn't go in my underwear, reward rules. So I don't think like the I think the teacher should have more permissions, uh, should have like more skills available in controlling the virtual world where there's an education session, a class, than the students. But concerning the avatar, I don't know. I think like if there's a nickname that above the avatar in the UX UI design that says, okay, that is that student, and the avatar is not too distracting, so
Too
that
distracting.
distracting, like,
Distracting. What's too distracting?
yeah, I mean that's the thing because that like is not like a virtual world where you're like just having fun and chatting with people. Like there is a purpose. You're in class to learn something and to get something from someone and to give it to someone else. That is knowledge, that is a conversation, like an interrogation, an exam. So distracting for the alumni, not for the teacher, because the teacher, I mean, like she just has to this. They have to deal with it, I guess. But I mean, I think like in that case, maybe there should be more like a palette of possibilities of avatars for the students. Also, because we're talking with about people that like in high school, you are 18 or 21 when you become adult, and that's the end of the high school. Like if you're very very young, I think in that case we open up a lot of parentheses and topics about how young people uh, should be in virtual worlds, how much they can interact with the other people. I mean, if it's a class, of course, it's a protected environment, but also because how much do they know about the avatar they're choosing and how much does affect the interaction with the teacher. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm saying distracting. And distracting is a very vague word, so it's not going to help much. But
Yeah. But I think it's the right one. I mean, because it's so hard to know and define and to categorize.
mm,
It's exactly that. We don't really know. But and just I think because we've gone over a little bit on time, but I think
a little.
your answer, Rico, just convinces me that I would very much like to have a follow-up discussion about the role of authority. When is authority appropriate in a virtual world, and what types of responsibilities, what types of functions and abilities uh, should an authority have in which context and use cases? Because you just highlighted that children, they're different. Young people, and we're not just saying like children, we're saying like young adults. Young adults are different. It makes sense. There's a reason and a justification to restrict their abilities in the presence of others in this context, because there's a lack of trust in them, in what they will do and understanding what the consequences of their actions are. There's a lack of confidence in them, and thus this justifies more, more restriction, more regulation.
Not only this is a space where there's a purpose, that is this
Yeah.
exchange of knowledge, that wouldn't be the case if it was like a virtual random word in VR chat or rec room where the purpose is entertainment and socialization. So yeah, let's make a part two where we discuss this and we go more in depth.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. That's what we'll do. So I want to thank everyone who tuned in for our live chat and discussion, who shared questions and comments
Thank you,
before and during.
Lucas. Thank you, Camille. I'm saying
Yeah,
thanks
thank
to
you
the
both. Yeah.
comments. Thank you.
And yeah, and I think we'll try to return to this format. Just again as a way to kind of work through some of the thoughts that we we encounter through our regular work and our activities and meetings. So again, thank you everyone. Federico, thanks for joining me in this this long discussion and chat, and I look forward to more. And if you have any contributions and any comments that you weren't able to make live, you can certainly do them in the comment section here, or also in the XR for Human forum, which is a online message chat board for ethical topics of various forms. It's a free place to join. It's forum.xrforhuman.eu, and the four being the number four, because that's how we do things in EU projects. But we'll also put a link here in the comments later. But that's another place to continue the conversation on these topics and more. So thank you very much again, everyone, and enjoy
We
the
want to
rest
hear
of
your
your.
opinion.
What's that?
Please do. We want to hear your opinion on this
Yeah.
because I think it's needed, this kind of conversation. So please do. Please comment, share your opinion, how much controversial it may be. Just put it here in the chat, put it in the XR for Human forum. We want to hear your opinion.
Exactly. All right, everyone. Thank you very much, and see you next time.